Well, COVID impacted the retail grocery store, like I mentioned, the mad rush, the buying habits, the consumers buying so much product and cleaning out the shelves, and the manufacturers having to adjust. Well, that involved us getting involved with our manufacturers, with the retailer, showing us what the demand was, what items we needed to concentrate on, how do we get those produced, how much, how many pounds can you produce? I mean, what your equipment output was. I mean, we really had to dive down into the weeds to the stuff that we never even thought we'd have to think about or what we had to do. So, uh, I guess that would be a good example. Was what was it?
Right. So for customers specifically, you would say that the demand in retail has only continued to go up, basically. I mean,
The
there's
demand in retail has definitely gone up and has continued to go up. Yes,
right. Okay.
100%.
So going off of that, how has the pandemic impacted your competitors?
Uh,
And who are your competitors?
as far as competitors from our company,
Yes.
I really don't think. How do you say this? I really don't think we have any direct competition in a sense because basically we represent our manufacturers at HEB. There are other brokers that manufacture other
Areas,
well,
other areas
they
apart from
represent the
yours.
same lines that compete against us, and they stopped all promoting during that time period. So everybody's on a level playing field. We couldn't promote to compete against each other in the stores. We were just trying to fill our orders, and if you call that competition, I guess everybody's having the same things at different times. We found that Texas was being affected while Midwest wasn't. Now Midwest is being affected, Texas isn't, and it was in cycles. Different parts of the country it affected different times, and then different proteins. You know, pork was affected extremely hard, and then poultry, turkey was affected, and we had different things happen in different raw materials. Like ham, that was just I represent a supplier, and of course they have four items. Three of them are ham and one's turkey. The turkey item is doing well. The three hams can't hardly get anything at all out of our supplier to fill. So it puts your item in jeopardy in the shelf. The retailer goes and looks for other items to replace your items if you can't supply them in a so you deliver a truck, that product lands, it only provides 2 days out of the 7 days demand. So he's out 5 days a week. So he or she is going to go look for a different supplier to provide products to keep product on the shelf for their consumers. So I would say everybody's out there doing their best, communicating, uh, adjusting, and making ends meet as far as trying to get their retailers product. I guess how it affected my competition. I haven't really talked to them very much. We don't see each other anymore. We don't go there anymore. We've talked on the phone here and there. I think everybody's in the mode of trying to
Just trying to fulfill
cover
their own
home base.
orders.
We're just trying to all survive this whole thing because this is totally a different situation. You know, there's something you can't plan for,
Right.
this is all we're learning as you go.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, how have policymakers impacted your business as far as regulations and that sort of thing? Has it been impacted?
I could say I don't know. I think that there were some things that the industry did. I guess regulating. No, I don't think there was any more regulations. The regulations that they had to deal with the most is like if somebody was sick in a department, they would send the whole department home, and they did initially during COVID, the first outbreaks. As it progressed, they said that didn't work well at all. So they would, if you were showing symptoms, they were telling people to stay home, don't come into work, don't get everybody else affected. They were testing, they were taking temperatures, they were making them. They rerouted them. Made one way past where you can't pass back through, and they cleaned back behind there. And there were a lot of things they put in place as far as regulating that way, so
Right.
to help.
As far as being the people that actually make the food, I mean, how are they? Because I mean, if you're making the food, can that, and you have COVID, can that impact consumers through the packaging or through the product?
Well, that's what everybody thought at first, right? Everybody's spraying down all the boxes, and they can live on the boxes for X amount of hours, and depending on I don't hear that as much anymore.
Right.
I just know that if a person has COVID, that they have to quarantine for 14 days or get 2 negative tests, and then they can come back, kind of thing. Um, I
So it's not a concern that if someone had COVID, an employee
touching
had
product
COVID
and
and touched the
pass it
product.
on. I wouldn't say that. I'd say it's still a concern, but I just don't hear it as often anymore. I don't hear
Right.
that being a
major
concern as much. Like
Okay. So throughout all this, what has made your life in your industry most difficult? The one thing that's made it most difficult.
I think the social interaction with our buyers, and I think from us to them and from them to us, and that interaction. And when you get men and women together in a group setting to talk about a project, a lot of people take different balls and run them in different directions, and then get back to each other and get things moving and keep it moving forward faster. Whereas now, those don't happen as often, and everybody's trying to keep things moving. We're not as effective as we used to be, and I think that social interaction, seeing each other on a regular basis, having meetings on a regular basis, face to face, person to person, and in group settings as well, is more effective than working from home, being spread out, not seeing each other on a regular basis. I think that there's a lot of things, communication that gets lost. I know that the men and women there in the office there at HEB, being in that office, hearing things, having quick meetings, get-togethers, be able to hop up, go tell somebody something, can't do that anymore. And there's things that are getting lost and dropped to the field. It's just not happening as
dropped in the communication process
it
that are
definitely,
necessary
yeah.
for business.
And so now it's all, and then emails. The amount of emails has gone up,
Right.
and when you get so many emails, you just bog down. And I think a lot of people are struggling that I know there. You can't keep up with them all. And then between the email, text, and telephone, and then of course conference calls and meetings and Zoom calls, it can have a tough. It's just very difficult to get everything accomplished like you used to get accomplished.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in regards to the whole food industry, what's been your biggest takeaway from the pandemic moving forward? Just your biggest takeaway to this point? Biggest lesson that you've learned through this?
The largest lesson I learned through this whole pandemic.
Most outstanding takeaway thing. I mean, you've covered a lot, but something that you never would have expected to take away from something like this.
I guess don't take for granted how your everyday life, your job, can change in a heartbeat, because this is something that I never would have ever expected, for us not to have to go over there and do those things we were doing. And now we don't do them at all, and we're still surviving, and we're still getting it done. We're not as effective, like I said, but we're still getting it done. We found out ways to change, but I guess it's the way of doing business has evolved. A lot of people, brick and mortar versus e-commerce. I think that would be I think that has the most impact. I would say consumer spending, buying habits. They don't have to go to a grocery store anymore, or even go inside that grocery store. They can pull up, have an appointment, have the groceries brought out to their car, and they're willing to pay that extra price. Not all consumers can. Not everybody can afford that. Not everybody offers that. But I think that's the biggest takeaway I've gotten. I cannot believe how fast retailers adjusted, manufacturers adjusted sales reps adjusted, everybody in the meat and food industry adjusted to take care of that consumer change that we had to make in order to make sure customers could shop. How about the employees, all the changes that they had to do in the stores? I mean, the way they had to ramp up and gear up their online, their website, their people to go pick the groceries for those people, the new labor that was added, all the jobs that were created, all the jobs that weren't needed anymore, how they had to change the transition. Everybody, just the whole transition from when the pandemic hit to where we are now, and how business has changed so much. And then the growth was crazy as well. I mean, that's just unbelievable, the growth that we had on the retail side. But again, there's a lot of industries where the growth isn't there anymore, it's almost gone. So there's definitely a big evolution in the pandemic.
Speaking of evolution and changes, technology has definitely been one of those major growing industries. You brought up an interesting point about curbside and e-commerce and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where do you predict, or how do you predict the
Oh.
future will be in regards to the retail industry, especially after this pandemic?
Oh wow, that's so. I've heard all kind of numbers saying how much. I think currently right now, online shopping at retailers is under 10%, but they project that could be up to 30 or 40% of the overall business.
Of overall business and retail,
Yes,
e-commerce.
yes. Online
That's really
shopping, if you will, at grocery stores, which, I think that trend is a lot higher over in Europe, and it does transition back over to North America, or, Western states. We're all starting to see that happen over here, and who would have known a pandemic would have sped that process up, but it did. But it's definitely interesting. And I'm at the latter part of my career. I just turned 50, and I think 10 years left. I'll probably retire when I'm 60 and get out of this thing. And as much as it's changed, and since I started this industry, I was, I guess, officially when I was 23 years old. So I've been doing it now for 28 years.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Somewhere in there, 27 years, somewhere in there.
Long
but-
time.
Yeah, it just changed a lot, and I would say towards the latter part, the changes happen faster and faster, and
Right.
I think there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot more. I think automation too. Manufacturers, the employee challenge they've had, manufacturers are really going to the automation side, and they're figuring out ways to get their products produced without having to be heavily relied upon employees to show up to do it. They're finding ways to really scale back the employee need and go into more automation, and it's made everybody be smarter, work harder and smarter, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate it.
All right, hope it helped.